Welcome to the 10,000 Things Zoom for March 22nd, 2020. I'm Robert Saltzman, author of the 10,000 Things, and my guest today is Jez Alborough. Jez is an artist who created a series of children's books that are beloved by parents and children alike, and that have sold millions of copies. Jez is also someone who went through a rather dramatic awakening and has written 2 books about his understanding from that perspective. I haven't read the books, but here's a brief passage Jez sent me from his 2019 book, The Infinite Journey. It seems that the general image of someone who's enlightened is a person who's reached a level of understanding that makes them almost superhuman. It's as if they have special powers and aren't subject to the same laws as normal people like us. This belief causes no end of obfuscation and misunderstanding. For a start, it suggests that this sort of freedom can't happen to you. It's exclusive to some divinely appointed superhuman breed. The word enlightenment has come to refer to an idea of human perfection. Waking up has nothing to do with being superhuman, special, or extraordinary. It's about being fully human. What does it mean to be human? One of the essential characteristics of being human is our capacity to feel. The aloof, detached, superhuman idea of what enlightenment looks like is nothing more than a projection which is upheld by anyone who has an investment in it. That could be a seeker or their teacher. Now, if you know my work at all, this is an idea I've expressed often myself, so I look forward very much to hearing more from Jez about it. I became aware that he has had some wonderful experiences in life. He attended art school and has created a series of children's books, as I mentioned, based on his drawings and the text that he also writes. And I guess I'd like to ask him about that first. So, Jez, please tell us how you got started.
Drawing and making up stories was something I was drawn to from a very early age. It just seemed to be as natural as breathing for me. And that interest was fed by comics, where I saw characters with speech bubbles. And it was a way of expressing thoughts and speech and story, putting it into frames and dividing time up in that way was very appealing to me. And I think I learned a language from those comics. So I went to art school. And after art school, well, at art school, I made my first book, which was a poem, which was called Abundance. And it was a play on the word abundance. And it was about buns at a dance. It was very silly, but it was rhyming. It was a story that played out, and it was my first taste of creating a real book. So I went out into the world and I found the only place to use what I was interested in, what I could do, was children's picture books, because it's about story writing and drawing. So I, after a while trying to do illustrations for magazines, which didn't go very well, I found my place. There's a publisher here called Walker Books, and the man who owned the publishing company is called Sebastian Walker. He died in the 80s from AIDS, very sadly, but he was a real visionary. He was one of those guys, you know, who was like a Steve Jobs in the picture book world. He saw talent, and he was willing to put money behind it and nurture it. And I'm always grateful to him, because it seems now that doesn't really seem to happen so much. Everything's give it now. How much have you sold? What was your last book like? How many sales did it get? And these days, back then, I had 7 years where I published books, but none of them sold very well. Until 92, I think, when my first big seller happened. And it was called Where's My yeah, I continued from there.
Well, that must have been really exciting when the first book took off and you found you could make a living that way.
Yeah, it was a feeling of being at home at that time. This is what I'm meant to be doing. So yeah, it was really exciting. Yeah.
So what about your two recent books that are about awakening? Can you say something about those?
Yes. So because I write, it was very natural for me to want to express my experience in this area. And for a long time, I've written only for children's minds, which is a love. You are tuning into innocence, really. When you're breaking down life into bite-sized pieces for these young minds and helping them to learn about the world and feelings. And so it's a really beautiful job. But of course, not of course, but for me, as a writer, I felt limited in the end. I knew one day I wanted to use my writing skills for writing for adults. And when what happened to me, the time seemed to have arrived. And it was one of those feelings like, this is something I've got to do before I die. So I did it.
So what is it that happened to you? That you wanted to express in those books? How did that occur?
Where to begin? Okay, so in my life, I had two streams, I would say. One was fed by my character. And by my character, I mean my talents, my individuality, my joy, and my picture books. And that whole world really was an expression of that. And I feel that that came through in the end. It managed to get through. And in terms of sales, people kind of got that there was something about love being expressed in these books. So, you know, I'm very grateful that I'm still supported by the sale of books that I made 20, 25 years ago, 30 years ago in some cases. You know, some books die a death and they don't last long. Some look like they're going to take off and they just die before they've even had a chance to grow. So it's quite sad. And some have a longevity. So I'm very grateful for the ones that do have that longevity. And that allowed me the space really to write these books. So going back to my theme, so there's this theme through my life, character. And there's this theme for what I would call, and we're going to get onto this obviously, personality. So just going to read you a quick quote because from Gurdjieff. Gurdjieff said, kill your personality, the false thing which we think is us. It has to die so that individuality may grow. Now, I didn't know that Gurdjieff talked about personality in this way, but for me, the understanding that happened to me was very clearly about identifying and disidentifying from what I call my personality. So in order to tell you a bit more what I mean by personality, for me, that means it's the, he would call it the false self, the sense of self that grows in relation to our childhood experiences and for what I would call the loss of our natural state. So whereas the personality grows as a protection, and it has certain strategies and a reason, which is to protect us from pain that can happen in early life. And it grows and we don't realize, and we identify with it as we grow because that's what it does. I don't realize that this is something that's been overlaid over that original being and self. So I want to make clear, this is nothing against the idea of having a self or a sense of individuality. In fact, it's a celebration of it. But that individuality that I'm talking about is for me expressed in what I call the character, whereas the personality is the part that is, you know, there's so many different expressions of it, but, you know, it can be the cartoon expression of it is a big ego. Someone who needs to show off to make themselves look great all the time. The inverse of that, of course, is low self-esteem and somebody who has a kind of lack of self-love and is down on themselves. So the personality encompasses all those personality traits. It encompasses emotions. It encompasses, which I differ from feelings, which we can get back to. It encompasses neurosis, excess worry, and over-identification with the mind, overthinking, all these sort of things that cause what I call personality suffering, to distinguish it from normal human suffering, which is part of human life and nobody escapes from. So my contention is that there is a kind of suffering that is optional once this is found. That's something to chew on, right?
Yeah, I don't know how the others are seeing you, but on my end, you're breaking up a bit. As I said, the internet, which is never, but I did catch um, uh, the internet down here has never been great, and now there's a bunch of people who are working from home and they've got it on 24 hours a day. So, but I did hear that, and I think you and I agree on that. There's some essential character that seems to be a part of each person, and in a fortunate life such as yours, it gets to express itself fully. And then even though the personality, the protective personality is there, the expression of character is so much more robust that the personality does not really seem important. That's my understanding of what you're saying. And in other cases, the personality may take control, and so the character never really gets to be fully expressed because there's low self-esteem, or you have a show-off egomaniac. Is that the idea? Do I have it?
Yeah. Yeah. But I guess I'm going further than that, and I'm saying that everybody is living, most people are living thinking that they are this personality, and they're not aware that it is just an identification with something which is which has the personality creates its own dream world, its own world. Now I know there's a talk out there of all of life's a dream, and now I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is the personality creates its own dream based on its beliefs and its emotions. So to try and give you an example of that, I think we talked last time, perhaps we took the case of someone with anorexia who believes that they're fat, even though they're not. You know, objectively, anyone can see that they're not. But in their heads and in their belief, they are fat. This is a bad thing. And that belief creates much suffering and suppression of the character in that person's life. So that is a kind of an more extreme example. But my contention is that everybody, as long as there is identification with personality, that dream of personality is being created and lived until it's been penetrated. So when we talk about this is it, and everything you talk about so beautifully, that for me, my experience was that, you know, I absolutely, there is a readiness that needs to be there in order to perceive that.
So a
So
readiness.
my own experiences, readiness, being ready.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes. So
And
let me ask a question at that point, because this is one that comes up very often. I'm asked this question often. Is there any way to prepare oneself to be ready?
it's one of those impossible questions, isn't it? I think preparedness can happen, but it's not something you can do. So let me unpack that. What I mean by that is that for me, when I was very young, in my 20s and 30s, I had what I call openings. So these openings were experiences that were outside of my personality as it was at that point in my life. It was like being lifted up. You know, when people talk about out-of-body experiences, it was like that, lifted up and looking down on that life, which for the rest of the time I thought was who I was and was totally real and was the only reality. So these weren't, I'm not talking about, they were very practical in a way. And it seemed to be life showed me that there was a way, there was something that I hadn't known, that there was there was a side of life that could be lived that wasn't invested and engaged only in that personality. And that opening showed me the qualities of that. And the qualities of that, I say there's four. One is, if I can remember them, one of them is stillness. So really it's like the mind is not in its usual busyness. It may be still there, but you're not lost in its crazy busyness. So stillness, joy, which you could kind of maybe put with love. Now this is a joy that's not based, I'm not talking about happiness, you've won the lottery. I'm talking about the joy that exists prior to any event causing it. Okay. The third one would be choiceless awareness, which is, I know, a term that you use, I think I've seen. And the fourth one would be full feeling engagement with life. So those four things I've looked back and I've realized characterize those experiences. Now I find that my experience was that those were things that I came into this life with, and that's what I seem to see in very young children. So the openings were like a taste, a glimpse back of what I call our natural state. So I found that during these openings, which I in no way caused, and of course I wanted more of them, and of course they were not at my beck and call, and as soon as I wanted them, they disappeared. But I was blessed with quite a few through my 20s and 30s. So these showed me there was another way of living, another kind of reality. And I'm not really talking a spiritual realm or anything. I'm talking this realm, this reality, but it's living it not through this conglomeration of functionality that we call personality, that holds our pain, that comes from the personality. So this went on through my 20s and 30s sporadically. And it was, I guess it was like a guiding light, like a beacon that showed me, you know, sometimes it would disappear for years and then it would come back. And it seemed like I was given such a gift because it was, you know, nobody else had told me about this. I didn't tell anyone about them because it seemed such a private thing between me and life. But it was a gift that I seemed to have been given, and I had no idea why. And it was nothing about being special. It seemed to me more a gift that seemed to be saying to me, hey, there's something else going on here. So this started for me a spiritual search, which is, I think, seeking as very bad name now. I kind of understand why. I was thinking about that term, and I was thinking, well, after those openings, I started seeking, because I wanted to know what these openings were about and what they meant. And surely someone else must have had them, and perhaps they can help me find what they meant. So my seeking, I think seeking has become associated now with escape. But my seeking was about the opposite. I wanted to reveal, to find out what these meant. So I did the usual rounds of going to teachers, and I ended up in Rajneesh's organization for not long, couple of years. And other people, like you do, I searched everywhere for answers to this. And I never really found the answer. I mean, I learned a lot along the way, and I had some interesting experiences, but no one really gave me the answer until what happened to me, where I was birthed out of that identification with personality. Now, for me, that happened in a very dramatic and painful way. And that was in 2004. And that was a breakdown. So, are you interested in this?
Of course. I'm more than
Yeah. Okay.
finding this really
Okay. So,
yeah. Please continue.
say again.
I say
Okay.
continue, Jez. You have my full attention.
Okay. Okay. So, so like I said, I had these two parts of my life. I had the character my character seemed to be pretty confident. And I had the success, so that kind of helped bolster that too. I would do tours, I would promote my books, and I was being pretty successful. So this is one side of my life. I was aware underneath that there was another side, which was the suffering of my personality. And there was great grief and pain in that. Now, most of the time, that didn't much impinge on that, although I knew it was there. But the way I describe it is when I had a breakdown, that pain of the suffering of my personality came over and took over from this character one. And it was so strong that the functioning of that character was curtailed. It was a switch going off. It was a very dramatic event. And because I had previously been so confident and successful in the world, people couldn't believe it, because it was an absolute change. Because my life became absolutely secluded, because I couldn't function in the world. I couldn't do what normal people could do, because I felt like I had no center from which to do it. So for many years, I kind of became a recluse. I mean, that was real social distancing. Now, this was not something I chose. This is not something I thought was a practice. I had absolutely no choice in it. It was something that happened to me that I had to ride and deal with. And it seemed to me in the middle of it that it was never going to end. And it was a very terrible, terrible thing, because I think breaking down for most people is probably the worst fear, which I understand, because we need a sense of who we are and an ability to function and operate. And if that is suddenly taken away, it's the most scary thing, I think, that can happen to you. So my birthing into this, my way to this was dramatic and very painful. And I'm aware that it doesn't have to be that way. And I know some people hear my story and they freak out because they think, geez, I don't want that happening to me. And I totally understand that. But what I would say is that the basis of what happened to me, which is the dismantling of my personality and my identification with it, that we're talking about to be revealed. So I've seen that happen to, for example, my wife, and it hasn't happened in the same way as it happened to me. There was no big one dramatic breakdown. But I have seen the same effect happen over many years, the breaking down of that identification with that personality and the same results that come from it. So it's been like a kind of case study for me. And I've seen it in perhaps one other too happening, starting to happen. Yeah. So yeah, it was quite a journey. My books are the fruit of that experience and the writer in me wanting to capture and express what I learned from that experience. And what those books are is they're really a map. Now, I think there can be an aversion to maps because it sounds like someone's trying to kind of create a system. But I think in my job as a picture book artist, I had to, in order to write stories, you have to break down information and knowledge and choose very carefully what piece of information is delivered at each point in the story to tell that story to its best advantage. So if you put the denouement in the middle act, it's not a good thing. The whole thing won't work so well because they won't have had the information to understand the denouement. So that way of thinking that I've learned and craft of structuring things is something I very much applied to my books. And I wanted to lay this thing out that I had seen from the inside in very clear steps so that it grows. So like if you get that step, this step makes sense and this step makes sense. And I didn't want to take for granted that anybody knew what I was talking about. And I developed a language that I hope has clarified exactly what I mean by these terms, because as we know, language is fluid and can mean very different things to different people. So in the back of my book, I have a glossary where I'm very carefully define exactly what I mean by those terms so that my communication of this is as clear as it can be. Having said that, I've found since that there is, in many cases, the books don't land because most people, they don't even get beyond the idea that they think they are their personality. So it's a non-starter. That's the one thing. So there has to be, so what I mean by readiness is I think there's two levels to it. The first level of readiness would be a dissatisfaction with the idea of being fulfilled by the normal pursuits that one has, human pursuits in life, success, money, whatever it is. So there's a step of dissatisfaction with that, which is step one. Then often people move on to the spiritual realm and they project all the same things in the spiritual realm. And then, of course, as you point out, one can get lost and stuck in that. And it's very easy to. And the journey can kind of end there. It can be truncated. It can be cut short. And new beliefs are adopted, new ideals, but it's still a personality. It's a spiritual personality. So for me, the real doorway, gateway to this is when, of readiness, is when there is a readiness to see through that whole spiritual personality and game too. And not many people want to go there because that is that same fear that I expressed about the breakdown, that people think, well, what will be left? And there's a natural aversion to it, because if you have everything invested in, I am this thing, this personality, the last thing you want to do is give it up. So it's better to stay this side of the line, be a devotee, be a spiritual person and have that personality, than cross that line. But my contention is that there is a step of when you're ready, there is a line that can be crossed. And this is what I feel you're talking about. And the reason I heard of you is because I saw the Back Gap interview and I thought, someone talking from the other side of the line, you know, and this is what I loved. It was Great. Um, yeah, I've said a
Well,
lot.
that's just beautiful. Thank you so much for going into that, Jez. It's just a pleasure to hear you that way because it's so clear. It's just a very clear statement. Obviously, comes from personal experience,
Yeah,
and which is the only kind of experience there really is. So I'm aware that
yeah,
45 people here, and I must say, before I throw the floor open to participation and questions and comments, I see so many faces here of people I really love. And thank you so much for being here. I just saw one of those people smile, so I know that she understands. Um, we're also isolated now by this plague from the normal social intercourse, and so this is very heartwarming.
yeah.
So with that, Jess, I hope you're prepared to answer some questions and hear some comments. I think we'll just open the floor now. If you want to speak, you raise your hand. I see a hand raised. David Matt.
Hi, Robert and Jez. That was very interesting to hear what you had to say, Jez. And Robert, you know, I'm kind of a student of your writing and your work, and you know, you expressed that you agreed with a lot of what Jez was saying, and I'm kind of a word fanatic, and Jez was talking about character and personality, character good, personality bad, basically, and I wonder how that ties in with some of the terminology you've used in your writing.
Can I interject there?
Sure.
So I understand the broad sweep of that is character good, personality bad, but in actuality, that kind of thinking I found is not helpful. The way I see it is it's seeing what is rather than labeling good or bad. And if I found that, you know, people label ego bad, and the reason I use personality partly is because I wanted to get away from that. So I don't see personality as, I know you probably don't mean this, but I'm just using it as a springboard to talk about this. I don't see personality as bad. I see it as something that happens, and there's something people identify with, and that has consequences. And I think that is the way to view it. That's the way I view it. Otherwise, it becomes like the bogeyman, and that's really not what this is. It's really just seeing life as it is. And this is something that I've seen. I don't really cast it as bad. Please continue.
Yeah, I appreciate you saying that. But I still think I'm interested in Robert's response to my question. The terminology that Robert might have used in his writing that relates to this kind of character as opposed to personality.
Oh, well, we all have a personality. Can't erase that. It's imposed on us by what Jez is calling character comes into the world as an infant, and the infant is immediately subjected to all kinds of pressures depending on the parents and the larger cultural surround and the time and place of birth. All of this begins to mold survival skills, and a lot of those survival skills are things that we would call personality. For example, I may learn to be polite, and the politeness that I have learned will be an aspect of personality. Whereas what Jez was talking about before, which is a kind of joy and gentleness, if you have that, you don't really have to be polite, you see? So it's not that you erase your personality, but you find something in you that is shines brighter than the personality. So the personality continues. I mean, some people are just nervous in nature, and so they're always acting out anxiety trips. Other people, you mentioned being confident. So then you also have a personality that relies on confidence until it breaks down, as you were saying. So for me, personality is kind of like a friend you might have who's not quite with it, and you help him or her by being understanding. And like this is silly. I really do this. If I get into a bad mood or I'm sad or something, I will embrace myself just like this, and I'll say to myself out loud if there's no one around, "It's okay, Robert. You'll be okay." See, and that is the character or the self talking to the personality. It's like taking care of the personality. I don't know if you agree with that, Jez. Let me turn it over to you for comment.
Yes, I do. I do feel though that my experience is that some aspects of my personality start to lose traction and fade. That's what's happened for me. And as the character, I like the way you expressed it, as shines through. Life becomes more informed by joy when it is, you know, an ability to perceive joy. But like I said, I want to bring it back to the other qualities that I mentioned of fulfilling engagement with life, which means that it's not just joy, but there is a greater capacity to joy, I've found very much since this has happened. And the other side is that if there is pain, there's pain, and there's absolutely no part of me that's running away from it, because what I learned in that breakdown is that the breakdown for me became my greatest teacher I've ever had, and I'm sure will ever have. And the moment I accepted it as a teacher was when things started getting a lot easier. It was like the true meaning of the word awe-inspiring, terrifying teacher that could kind of bring me down with, a look, bang, smashed to the floor again. But something in me decided to use it to learn, and it became my teacher, and I did learn from it. And what I learned from it was this identification with what I thought I was, this did get dismantled. And in that, things that I thought were me, I realized weren't me, and they started to fade because I was no longer kind of invested in them. I was no longer giving them the power to run this life. So I have found, I mean, you may disagree, but I have found that there is a movement in which those aspects of personality, the way I use personality, for example, if there's a pattern of fear or something, I'm trying to think of an example with me. Okay, so a very recent example is, so I'm telling a big personal story here, but I've worked with my publisher. I've had a few publishers, but the main one I had with this guy, Sebastian Walker, that I mentioned earlier. I've had a relationship with them for, beyond about 30 years, which is amazing. And they've been a very good publisher, and I've known these people for so long. But gradually, it kind of felt last year like my investment in me as an author and illustrator was dropped. And, this was painful, and this was hurtful, and there were a lot of it. So, yeah, so I felt hurt. I felt angry at times. I didn't understand it. I wrote 2 new books last year and they didn't want them. So all sorts of emotions come up. But what's different now is that there is a kind of distance to those emotions. I'm not in the middle of them thinking that's the end of my life or that's the end of, it's terrible. And there's more like, yeah, God, I'm really feeling angry with the way they handled that. Couldn't they have done it a different way? Or there's this perspective that comes in, which means that because I'm not identified with that person who has those investments, that light shines through and allows me a perspective that deals with it. Now, it doesn't mean I don't feel the hurt or the anger, but it does pass through, and you kind of get the bigger seems to be, well, it's a surrender thing, really. And it's not that I'm surrendering, but a surrender happens that, well, you can't change it. You can't make them want to keep publishing you. You can't change, something's happening. And in the same way as with the breakdown, I had to go through with it in a very much smaller way with this. I kind of bow down to it because it's what's happening. So it's what's happening. So I can't remember why I'm saying this, but I guess it's an illustration of, I don't feel just that we're stuck with these worst parts of it, that there is a kind of, there seems to be a kind of evolution that happens. And that doesn't mean I'm focusing on the future. When I get through this, I'll be better. Not at all. But I'm simply, because I don't have an idea of better. I really don't have an idea of better. We have burnt out of me. What is happening is what is happening. And if what is happening brings a bit of pain, then it brings pain. So, yeah, anyway, I hope that gives some light. That there is some my message, if I have one, and I don't know whether you agree with this, is that there are some parts of suffering that can fall away. And I'm aware that that may be slightly contentious with you, but it's an interesting subject we could discuss.
Sorry, because my internet connection here is so buggy. You said there was something I might not agree with. Can you repeat that? Because I wasn't clear on what it was.
What I'm saying is that may be different, I don't know, is that rather than saying you're just stuck with your personality as it is, what I've observed is that with this identity from personality, those strategies of personality and strong emotions can fall away to some degree, at least, to quite a big degree, actually. So that what is living the life, it's not lived by those beliefs anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. That certainly can happen. I think what you and I might agree on, these are very fine points. What we might agree on is that even if that doesn't happen, it's okay too, because what is. And that seems to be key to the entire matter. When one arrives at seeing things as they are, then we only have this moment we really have to deal with, and we don't have to really know if my personality will improve or fall away or it won't.
Sure.
Yes. Well,
but the one that is, I was going to say, the one that is perceiving that, which I would call the choiceless awareness, is the one that sees through or embraces whatever is still there. I mean, sometimes I can laugh at I would still say that it's built upon. And I've found that these get exposed, and it's almost like a process of, they've got no validity anymore. The vine has been cut at its root and they kind of lose their power. And it's a dangerous thing to say, because I know that it can feed into an idea of seeking and it will be better in the future. But as you've just said, it's absolutely not based on that at all. I'm merely recounting something I'm observing, and I don't need it to happen, if you see what I mean. There's no investment. It's not like, when I get this is a phrase I use a lot. When I get this, I'll be happy. It's not. Only when I get rid of that bit of my personality. I don't even have a thing about getting rid of bits of my personality, but I'm simply saying that that seems to be something that is happening. And it seems to be a beautiful thing, because more of that light that you talked about, of the character, of the natural state, then shines through, and there's less obstruction.
Yeah, I think that's the point. There's less obstruction and more of the energetic being that we are. This aliveness can express itself freely, doesn't have to be throttled down. There were some.
Could you share what you told me about compassion, Robert? What happened with you?
Oh, well, okay. I see there's a hand raised. Howard, I'll get to you in a moment. Let me just remark on that. I think that part of being human includes compassion. It's not something that we have to produce. It's a natural feeling that we have, but it could be occluded or obscured if we're too self-centered and don't see the other people around us as being equal to oneself. But as soon as I understand myself, I understand that everyone else has the same thing going on. Different flavors, yes, but the same basic thing, where you are the center of your world and you have your concerns and your cares and your troubles and your joys. I just see everyone like that. I just see everyone like me. I don't mean they have the same personality. I mean they have the same basic needs. And as soon as you see that, well, I'm speaking personally, as soon as I saw that, my heart just melted into a puddle. And I cry a lot. And I laugh, but I cry for this world. The pain, I'll get to you, Howard, but this seems to be on the front burner for me right now. Here we are, I'm in this Mexican town near the end of Baja California. We're very cut off from the rest of the world in a way. And here we're told now that we're going to be practicing social isolation and we have to stay home from work and all that. But the truth is, I know a lot of people who are living from hand to mouth, and they can't stay home from work. If they don't get out with the push cart or whatever it may be and work that day, they may not be able to put any food on the table for the kids. That's a fact. Now, I try to help people like that as best I can in a material way, but there's not enough material wealth coming from me to be able to fix it. And so I feel like crying when I understand that those are the people who are going to get sick because they have to continue, and some of them will die. And those of us who can afford to hide out at home, you know, we may survive. So that's an aspect of compassion. Compassion has an element of suffering in it. If you're not willing to suffer for others, for what they feel, then compassion is just cut off. It can't flow. So in a way, okay, so you pointed out, Jez, that I'm kind of a harsh critic of the spirituality biz. And the reason I am is that so much of it is people want to learn how to be happy. And that seems like a wrong direction. I understand it. We all want to be happy. But I don't think that's the right direction. I think the right direction is to want to see things as they are, to want to have one's eyes open, if I can put it that way. Okay, Howard, I'm going to give it to you because you've waited a long time. Go for it.
Okay. Thank you, Robert, for hosting another terrific Zoom. And thank you, Jez, for sharing your story. I have one rather practical question. How soon after you left the Rajneesh group did you have the breakdown? And do you think that some of the energetic exercises that they practice, I never have, I've just read about them, played a part in that breakdown?
Oh, thanks for the question. No, it was a long, long time after. I think I was involved in the sannyas thing in about 84 to about 86, and the breakdown happened in 2004. So no, it was absolutely nothing to do with it. No.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you for holding this. I'm not a very good Zoomer. I was on Debbie's Zoom and I just didn't get out of here to change my name. So I did want to say that appreciate you holding this, and thank you, Mr. Alborough, for coming with us. I was thanks to the because of the pandemic isolation, I was able to look at your books and start reading. Haven't read them all, but I was curious. This, I think you just answered it, but this inquiry,
Yes,
as you call it in the glossary and in the book, it's not a. But you also say there's no process, and I agree with that. But this inquiry, is it just becoming aware of the effects of personality?
yes, because I think that the normal state of man out there is there is no awareness of it. And because there's no awareness of it, there is only the living of it. So in as much as it's seen through, it starts to lose its kind of grip, and the identification with it starts to be seen through. And there's a process of deconstruction of that identification with it. And that can happen through talking with someone who is there. So I actually feel there is a role for a teacher in this. Now, I feel that the role of teacher has been so solid that it's almost like spiritual teacher, bad, bullshit, it's ego trip, it's somebody taking advantage, it's abuse. It's totally linked with that now. But I've found in the few people that I connect with, I can see that it is helpful to have a guide in, well, what is personality and what isn't? And gradually that choiceless awareness that I'm talking about, which does see through it, it's like a flame that gets lit up, and then it's lit up in the person. And it's like the flame is passed on, and they start experiencing choiceless awareness in their own life, and they start saying, God, I really reacted to that guy when he said that to me. What was that about? And this is what I did all through the years. I wrote a journal and I examined my reactions constantly, and I examined my past, and I realized, oh, I've got reactions that other people don't have. And I have body illnesses that other people don't have that seem to be related to things that happen to me. I have things that are similar to my brother and sister in terms of belief, because I imbibed them from the beliefs in my family that are different to another family. So there are very practical things involved here that can be seen. And when they're seen, it's almost like if there's readiness, it just kind of happens. But I think the role of the teacher is to just say, yeah, what you saw there is absolutely, that's your choiceless awareness. That's it. It's working, you know. And the personality will try and come back in and gain control because it doesn't want to lose control. Yeah, that's the real, for me, that's what inquiry is. Inquiry is the choiceless awareness falling on the life and what is lived. And seeing through the activities of personality. So inquiry, I think, has become linked with the big boss, the one that everyone defers to, Ramana Maharshi. And I think he's very famous for talking about the question of inquiring, who am I? Which of course is all great and all true. But I feel what's happened with that and that use of inquiry is there's an answer that's implicit, because where we are, everybody knows, oh, the answer is there is no you. But you don't know that. It's like, that's not real inquiry. Inquiry finds out. And that's the sort of inquiry I'm talking about. What is real? Is the personality real? Is that who I am? Is what I am beyond that? What is left? This is for me what real inquiry is.
That's excellent, sir. I appreciate that answer. I've had experiences where, well, I started with Robert because like you, I said, this guy's coming from the other side. You know, it wasn't a spiritual personality,
Yes.
you know, and I had been living a spiritual personality for many years. I was doing that kind of escape seeking.
Yes.
And but after I started reading Robert and met him personally, I started seeing beyond that. But even before that, the reason I went looking for Robert was because in a 12-step program, they started saying things like suffering is optional. You know, pain is real, but the suffering is optional. And we had 12 steps to alleviate that. And, you know, we began to find out that the suffering came from the big baby or personality, being a king baby, they call it, being in charge, the personality.
Yeah.
And associating with that. So I found this interesting. I appreciate. I'm going to finish up the books. They are good, and I wanted to just for fun. I did see one that Robert and I debate about sometimes. I was wondering, you know, if a neurologist came up to you about the hard question and asked you about the big C and the little c, you know, the hard question is it from the brain or is it from somewhere else consciousness, the big C? And you make that distinction, and a neurologist might say, "How do you know?" That's just for fun because I don't know.
Yeah.
But I wanted to see your comment on that.
The big C and the little c of consciousness.
Right.
Yeah. So this is not the big question of consciousness that normally comes up, which is the brain inside or outside of consciousness? You don't mean that?
If that's
easy.
If a neurologist read what you said, because you have a universal consciousness outside of the brain, right? In your book, The Big C.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are many words. You know, okay, so I had those watching here has had those experiences. So we have to, you know, in order to discuss this, we have to have words that we can attach to that experience. And, you know, being is one. You know, I don't particularly go for the Indian ones because I'm not Indian. Nirvana, all of that has connotations for me I don't get. So being is quite uncluttered a word, I think. And consciousness seems, I mean, it's overused now, but it does seem to be a way of saying there is something. I mean, I don't see how anyone could disagree that something is living this. There is a life force. I could call it life force. It's more neutral, maybe. And then there is a personal consciousness, which is the one that thinks I am talking to you and I am lifting this up. And the consciousness that there seems to be my choice to do that. So those to me are the two kinds. It's quite simple, really. And as for the other big consciousness question, we don't know, and we will never know. And that's fine.
That's why I asked, you know, I agree. I don't think we have the ability to know. I don't think we have so I agree with you. I sure appreciate those answers, sir. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. And who wants to know? That's the other thing. Which is the part that needs to know that? Well, will it make your life better in some way? We don't know anything anyway. I mean, I know this. I do know this because I wouldn't be talking about it otherwise. But this is about relative level things. This is about the way a life is lived and what can be observed in a life. So I always say that you need to know what you need to know to find this. And then there's a dropping off point where you realize, well, outside of that, we don't know those big answers, but you don't need to. I don't need to, because isn't it great? We just live it. I don't, knowing those answers, there's nothing in me that says when I get those answers, I will be happier or more fulfilled, or I've got the answers I need. I don't really need any other answers, because the answers I've got lead me to living this life in a state of, well, not a state, but in a way of openness and heartfulness. And this is where we get to, this is it. That's enough.
Thank you, sir. I'm glad you.
That's very well said. I wanted to agree with you, Jez. I think that's really well said. And I think a lot of people get into this, I really want to know the answers to ultimate questions, not because they want to be able to live better, but because they're terrified of not being at all, what we call dying. And they want some reassurance that they are connected to something greater than oneself that will continue. And hopefully, superstitiously, they will be conscious of all that once the body stops existing.
What you said earlier, sorry to butt in, but what you said earlier about the compassion,
Yes.
you've proved that we are connected to something bigger than ourselves. And that's a very real thing now. That's happening now in what you've stated, and our feeling of connection in this talk. It's here now.
Yeah, I get that. But the problem is, if you feel this compassionate connection, then you don't really have any more questions. But if you don't feel it, then you are still completely centered on, I must survive by all means. And that's the most important thing going on. And right now that's being tested, because this plague is loose on the world and people are scrambling to find ways to avoid dying. And when we accept that everything will be lost, if we can understand that, as the Buddha taught, old age, illness, and death, and that this life that we cling to is like a light. It flashes for a brief instant and it passes. If we can come to terms with that, then we don't need to worry about compassion or what happens after death. It's all just very natural. And this is it.
As we keep saying, this is about seeing life as it is, and there are things you can know and the things you can't know, and seeing life as it is means that I'm not dead yet, so I don't know what happens. All I know is this is happening now. And for me, one thing that the Rajneesh got right was about celebration. They had a really good angle on that. We do have this now, and this is the most wonderful thing. And the compassion that you spoke about is the most wonderful thing, and that connection. And I would call it love, and the ability for you to have shared what you shared with these people, for them to be touched, is a wonderful thing. And I'm doing my little bit of that. And I find that incredibly touching, because to share about these things with people who are ready to hear it, the connection you have goes way beyond most social interactions that one has. So for me, they're very sacred, because you're dealing with things that are close to the heart, literally.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
So I guess what I'm saying is that I don't kind of personally fixate on death. My focus is more on, Castaneda talks about it as keep death on your shoulder. Well, I'm sure, like you, I don't have a problem doing that. That's kind of inbuilt, because you can't not see it and know it. But that casts the living of this life and the joy and the fact that it's even here in a light that is so wonderful and joyful and painful sometimes, but the painful bits is part of the deal, you know.
Well, that's very inspiring. It really is. I love hearing it. So I think who else had a hand up? I know there were some.
I have a question. I have a question for Chaz.
Go ahead.
Chaz, I noticed on your bio, because I read it when, you know, before the meeting, that you have a religious name of Swami Prem Andrus. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, that is something that's very annoying to me, because it was put on my Wikipedia page and I don't know how to get rid of it. It was something, it was a name that I had for 2 years when I was in part of the Rajneesh movement, which is absolutely no longer relevant to me. So for 2 years, it was important to me, and I kind of grew out of it.
Got it. How did the, one last question, the Oprah Winfrey bestseller list also kind of launched you. So that was actually something that was pretty pivotal. Could you talk about that with Oprah?
Well, it didn't launch me. It was a hit book, and that was part of it being
The hit.
that came afterwards. You know, it's not like I was on the show, but they picked the book and she talked about it and said she loved it. So that's the best ad you're going to get. So I was very lucky in that. Yeah. I got the stamp of approval.
That's very cool. One thing I noticed is behind you, you have a little card on your, it says, "This is it," to your lower left.
Yeah,
right there.
yeah.
That's something that Robert has a lot in both of his books.
Yeah, yeah.
That's very cool.
Yeah, I wrote, my brother actually carved that. It's a beautiful thing. I mean, it's an odd one, because I've thought recently, like, why did I get that? Because honestly, I don't need that. But I guess I like it to have it around. I don't know. Something that would look good in a garden. It's a true, for me, it's like the highest truth. And I think in order to understand and unlock the understanding of it takes great, takes a lot, you know. It's very easy to get it on a kind of basic level. And I would say that it can be used to avoid, because you can say, you can use it to avoid, you could say, okay, I'm depressed, and so on the top level, this is it, and it's true, this is it. That's what's happening. But it's not true that this is all there is. This is it, for me, means that that moment is lived fully, and that may mean feeling it fully and going into very painful feelings. So it's not a kind of excuse for stopping. It's more an excuse for going further. That's the way I see it. But it's such a big phrase. It covers everything. Yeah. You could go on forever into it, I think. Beautiful.
Very cool. Also noticed you're a guitar player. Listened to a couple of songs. Sounds great.
Thank you.
Some good stuff there.
Thank you. More on the way. You're a blues man, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. Been playing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, more hands. I did see a few.
So my question was, if that was at all the same as what Jeff was discussing, that kind of dropping off of the personality. I'm able to, for instance, review my life, so to speak, and laugh at some of the things this personality has thought and interpreted, and it's hilariously enlightening. I don't know if it's what Jeff is talking about, however. That's all I had to say.
It sounds like it is, Kathleen, because there seems like there's a lot of joy in it.
It seems like what?
It seems like there's a lot of joy in it.
Yes, absolutely.
And
I'm so free.
Yeah, and I would say that was one of the qualities of this happening. There can be a lot of joy in, it's like you're no longer tied to this thing, you're shackled to it, you're free of it, because this personality can hold a lot of stress and worry, and even for a split to unhook from that can be very freeing. You know, the danger of this, of course, is like, oh, I dance and then I feel free, and then the dance becomes a practice, and then I can only feel free when I dance. So this is obviously not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that same distance, perhaps we could say, happening as we talk now, or as you make a cup of tea. It becomes a function that arises. I can say that's what happened for me. And for me, it happened very much through writing. When I was in the middle of that breakdown, it was one October afternoon and it was sunny, and I was lying on the sofa and I started writing. You know, I'd had a terrible, terrible few months, and I started writing, and I realized the one that wrote was not the one that was in the suffering. And this was such a lifeline to me, that there was something there that is not in the middle of that suffering, however bad it is. And that, I can tell you, that suffering was bad, you know.
Well,
I'm talking about choiceless awareness, really. Just let me clarify what I mean by that. That I divide it into choiceless awareness and personality awareness. So personality awareness, by my definition, what I mean by that is that the personality has it's a survival strategy. It wants to survive. It doesn't want to be seen. It doesn't want to be exposed. So personality awareness will look away when something is shown up about it that threatens it. So in this business of inquiry, as I talk about inquiry, that's the one thing that doesn't work. That is like going in the opposite direction. What works here is only choiceless awareness, which is not in any way governed by the personality saying, I don't want to see that, that's too much. So there's a kind of courage involved in this, but it's not a courage that one produces. I mean, I found for myself that it was just an engine, that I had a yearning to find out what these openings were about. And that's what drove me forward. And it drove me forward even when it was really painful, because that yearning was bigger than any resistance I had. And I think that's the only way this thing, what awakening thing, can work. The movement in one to find this has to be, I think Krishnamurti once, or somebody once talked about this, you've got to want it like a drowning man wants air. And that's certainly my experience. Anything short of that, and it's not going to happen, because the personality will always win, and it will, from what needs to be seen, from the blind spots. And hence you get spiritual personalities who are very comfortable in a level of understanding, and they settle and make a camp there. And for me, that's when the personality awareness has subtly come in and said, well, of course they wouldn't say this, but yeah, we're making camp here, and this suits me fine, it's comfortable. And I've had this awakening, which means I can talk perhaps very knowledgeably about these things. But for me, when there are those signs of abuse and whatever, that's immediate, like sign that this hasn't happened to you. And I know that's contentious, because the argument is that, and we discussed this, Robert, that this doesn't affect behavior. And my experience is that it does. And that if that compassion that you talked about is found, I mean, you can see that is the diametric opposite of the idea of using a platform and a position to abuse someone. That's the exact opposite. There's a compassion, there's feeling for the other.
Right. And thank you. And the word compassion means with passions that others feel. In other words, we're all in the same boat in a way. We share this feeling of being alive and not knowing what's expected of us, where it's all headed. Those are the mysteries. And when I look into myself and see how much ignorance there really is of ultimate matters, that seems to be the root of compassion. So I want to turn it over to John Troy because he had his hand up, and Howard, you will be next. So John, please turn on your mic if you're still there.
Self-inquiry. Having shared conversations with my own confession, when Ramana Maharshi spoke of self-inquiry, it was not about figuring anything out or getting something intellectually. It was about simple noticing of what is, so that there's no intellectual framework or education or learned ignorance that could just add layer and layer and layer. These states of consciousness, spiritual personality, or this or that, for me, my own confession, it's all seamless. It's all here, all at one time. We may be kissed with a moment of stillness and touch eternity, but it's a transient part of the bloom in this flash of appearance. Like everything else, it's appear and disappear. And the schools of thought and the theologies and the cosmologies and the lingo breaks, shatters the seamlessness apart. And when I met Robert, the first thing I noticed wasn't anything that he said at all. When I looked in his eyes, I recognized pure innocence, just innocence, nothing intellectual whatsoever. That was my connection to Robert, and I've shared that with him. Not that he knew something or wasn't any of that at all. It was just the innocence. I think a lot of like 2020, I've been through the same exhausting remedies like everyone else. Just to see, trying to grasp an experience that I had and try to get back to that like it's some absolute state or happiness or whatever. But for me, that just brings on more ignorance, more thought, more confusion. I notice that Robert notices. I notice that when he takes a snap or captures an image, it's from noticing, just noticing. When we do self-inquiry, we notice without any words or any program or any intellectual trying to frame that up, we notice what is that really can't be grasped in words. And one thing that we can notice is the seamless, where we don't split and break up everything and fracture it up and name it. And there is a peace. And when we disappear at night, go to sleep, it's peaceful. Dreams maybe not peaceful. And observation, a thing we notice, all things return to stillness sooner or later, from suns to people to flowers to hurricanes to things that were systemically come to be, appear and disappear, seem to be, that's the way, or the Tao. So choiceless awareness might be a word that you could put on this seamless quality of right now, because right now is all we really want. One of us or several of us won't be here anymore. That makes this really precious, very precious. I have a little fear what might happen to Carol, or what might happen here, or my son, or I have at the same time a feeling of seamless, a feeling of acceptance of the there may be some things that come out of this that may help planet Earth. Certainly it was on a speed trip, consumption, traveling, everything. People are going to be spending time at home. There are things that could come from that. How things come back. When everything is wiped out and things come back, they come back a new way. There could be things there. We don't know. But it's beyond my sphere of influence to change any of it. I accept, do what I do. I find I'm online more now. There's more the communications, and I kind of like that. But to me, it's seamless. It really is. And inquiry is just noticing. And teachings sometimes comes across like we're trying to fix somebody, what to fix. Robert, when Robert talks about his writing, I really that it just comes spontaneously. There's no contrivance in it. There's no cleverness in it. There's no facade, spiritual facade put on it. What you see is what you get. It's a innocent confession. I prefer that over any teaching. It affirms my own inquiry and what I notice. I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, John. Thank you. I don't know, my internet connection here is unstable, and I missed some of it, but I think I got the drift. That inquiry is just noticing. It's not a project. It's just what we really do. We notice. And just to be aware that one is noticing will open a lot of doors. Let's see. Howard, I said you would be next. But Robert French I'd called on earlier and he wasn't there, but I think he might be there now. So Robert, would you care to speak? If you do, go ahead. Not hearing you. Could be my problem. Is anybody hearing Robert?
No.
No. Still don't hear. What a shame. We'll come back. Try to figure it out. We'll come back. David, Matt, were you wanting to speak?
Yeah, I had another question. For Jez, earlier in the show, Jez, you said something about feelings being different from emotions. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. Okay, so for me, feelings are, I'm slightly, in my mind is something that John Troy said, which is that this was very intellectual. And I'm aware that for me, this is not intellectual at all. I don't know whether I should talk about that at all, but I think just because something is seen and laid out doesn't mean it's intellectual. For me, intellectual involves a kind of overthinking or an escape into ideas or thoughts or mind fucking. And for me, this is the opposite of that. This is simply a laying out of what is seen. So this, what I have seen is that feelings is the fulfilling engagement with life is something that we all come with. A baby comes and it feels and it breathes and it feels the food going into its mouth. And this is part of our natural state. And the personality learns that it can repress certain things that it doesn't like and turn away from them and say no. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just something that happens. But when feelings, strong feelings are repressed because they're too painful to feel, are repressed. For me, the way I talk about it is they become emotions. And emotions are feelings that just are compressed over time, looked away from, repressed, and they grow and they have an energy to them and they want to be heard. So they can fester and become a part of that personality. So you can meet a personality that's a very angry type or a very sad type. And for me, this is the emotional life of personality. And this is something that gets unhooked from and left behind once those original feelings are connected with and released. So for me, that's kind of a brief outline of what I mean by feeling and emotion. And it's a very helpful thing to understand, I think, because feelings are, it's so important that we feel our feelings. And the emotion thing is something, it's a very different thing in emotion. It's a feeling that's kind of festered and become compacted and then kind of become very strong and explosive and destructive to the system. So that's how I'd lay it out.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jeff. Let's see if Robert French can try it again. Try it. Speak. No. What a pity.
I think sometimes a lot of people have these experiences, and because it's so alien or so perhaps fearful or odd to normal life, that people even repress them, like that, forget they've even had them. But what I found was when I had them, I kind of honed in on them and I wrote them up. What the hell was that? This happened. I felt bad. I saw that. So I think it's a very healthy thing to share them, and that is part of our communality. And I think it's very good to say, well, this is a side of life. You know, it's not so normal, but it's important. What you described there in that moment was probably a very sacred thing. I don't think it was more sacred than having a cup of tea downstairs with your husband, but it was sacred in a very particular form.
Yeah, it's just that.
It showed you something, didn't it? I mean, didn't it show you something?
Yeah, and it's still showing me, I think.
Yeah, and it will.
Just quickly, I do feel as if what's happening in the moment, that it's a time where we can look at ourselves so profoundly, and it's beautiful.
But you know, Wendy, that time is always there.
Yeah.
It will be when this virus is over.
Oh,
it will be. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm saying that, you know, something's happened. It's happened, and you need to. You don't need to. You could pack it away and repress it, or you could open to it and learn from it. And I'm sure, as you just said, you already have, and you will continue to. And I think if that's what this is about, there's nothing is looked away from.
Exactly.
And I think that the other point is that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Robert.
Well, it's my internet connection. I've got a lag here, so I have to kind of time when to interrupt, and it didn't work out well that time.
Yeah.
Boy, well,
I think there is a point too that it almost, my finding is it almost comes full circle that the everyday life becomes as sacred as something like that.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Point. That's the point I was trying to get at also. There's something special in each moment. It's the suchness of that moment, and it's passing away as soon as it arises. We can't hold on to anything. It's slipping right through our fingers. See, it's like you try to catch water, and with your fingers like this, you can't do it. And
and rather than trying to catch it, is an immersion in the feeling of it. That's the way you participate in it fully.
oh, you and I should write a poem together. I'll do one. You well, so that's it. And we've, you know, people ask me about what's this awakening thing, and I know you write about how the idea of enlightenment hangs people up and all of this. That's because it's so simple. It's nothing to seek. It's just an opening. It's a door, and you just see the door. You either see it or you don't in each moment. I mean, you can. I'm participating in this, but there's also just a sense of being that isn't participating or not participating. This is just, we're all here together. It's a mystery. I have no way to understand this. It can't be contained or defined in any way. So although you're a writer, I'm a writer, and we've both written books about this, and other friends of mine have also, whom I consider awake. I don't use the word enlightened. The awake people I know that try to write about it do better or worse at it. But really, when you get to the end of the book, it's the same story every time. And so in a way, you would think, well, why do I write these books? And what I've come to is that you're always talking to yourself. No matter what you say or write, you are the first witness to it. You're the one who hears it louder than anyone else. So we're always talking to ourselves. So I just try to do that in a way that amuses me and keeps me involved in actually applying myself to it. Or if I'm working with a camera, it's the same thing. Then it's a visual thing. And through the tool of that camera, I'm involved deeply in the subject matter. I think that's all it boils down to. There's no big esoteric secret. There aren't. And that's my critique, Jess, which I think you've followed. You and I are on the same page, man, so this is not a critique of anything you have said at all. My critique is people try to make this into an attainment, and it's not an attainment, it's a participation. It's all it is, noticing and participation, and we're all doing it. We just have to notice that we're doing it. Yeah,
most spiritual life seems to be about adding more and more, where in fact it's less, it's taken away. And then that viewpoint is revealed. But I do understand that until you see it, it does seem impossible and complicated because it's so simple that it can't be seen. But I think that's because the one that's trying to see it is the personality, as I would put it.
Well, I think I've written about this. I think people are generally in a hypnotic trance, and that could be spiritual hypnosis, or material world hypnosis, or a body image hypnosis, or whatever it is. But that just becomes all and everything. And really, it's just one tiny feature of a vast reality, and we just get lost in this. And yes,
Yeah.
then the fear arises, because if that thing is taken away from me, I'll be nothing, because we're so invested in throwing ourselves, whatever it is. Let's say it's Donald Trump, and his entire life is invested at what I call pig at the trough. So now we got little Donnie, and he's just stealing shit from his classmates and grabbing little girls and all the rest of it. And he just continues onward. Now he's terrified that,
and he's never going to break out of that trance.
It's your line now.
Sorry. Oh, you know that he's never going to break out of that trance. There's no way. That's his life, that trance. But I want to ask you, Robert, do you think it's possible to help people break out of that trance, which is what I would call the dream of personality? Do you think it's possible to help people to break out of that trance like that? Or like however?
Okay. In my experiments with this, what I've found is that it's very hard to get someone to break out of that trance and not get into a new trance. That seems, because now instead of being tuned into heaven with Jesus, now I'm tuned into this next thing. But to lose it all, although you're saying it feels good and I'm saying that also, but you're also saying it's really hard to convey that. And that's my feeling. It's very, I feel so happy. I can't tell you how happy I feel, truly. And I'm an old man. I broke my back last year. Things are not all great on the health thing, and here I am in the house and all, but I'm just ecstatic really at being at all. So that's what we're talking about here. How can you convey to another human the preciousness of consciousness that you fucking hear? I have no way to teach that. Really, I've tried. Probably I don't have time.
I think it can only happen when people who are close to that line, it's almost like if you're close enough to that line, you're close enough to hear a song of truth. And when I heard you, I think people who are close to that, to this, they don't know what it is, but they know there's something real going on here. And if they're not close to that line, it's not going to happen. And if they are, hopefully they will find people, who can kind of just say, yeah, it's just here, That's what I think you're doing. That's what I'm trying to do too.
Okay, well,
May I ask a question?
Yeah, let me just finish up on this. Jez hit the ball in my court here. I like to return it. Yeah, my experience. Well, now I've lost the thread. You were saying that you think people can be helped if they're close to the boundary line.
About being ready and close to the line. Yeah.
I guess that may be true. I just don't know the magic words. I really don't. People say, well, Robert, you're awakened and you're speaking from the other side and all this kind of thing. But there really isn't another side. And it only seems that way because of what I call splitting. You have a you are now, and you have the you imagine you want to be, or that you would be if you only could let go and surrender and all this jazz. I don't actually know how to bridge that gap. I think all that I do in my work, mostly what I do in my work, is take things away that people believe in, because I know that those things are not essential. And the more of them that are taken away, the more what is essential will be revealed. I think that's the best I can do. Yes.
Same thing, and I guess I will put it in a way that I am taking away the idea in people they are. That's the way I would put it, because of the technology I'm using. So if someone's really angry about something and in an emotion, if they're ready, I will be able to point out, did you see that? Is that who you are? Was there someone that was able to say, God, I got really angry then? Why was that? And it's just a hair's breadth, but it means the difference between living this or not, or seeing this or not. So I think it can be pointed out, but I think it's different for every person. And I guess it's probably easier if you're talking one-to-one with someone, because you can actually, that inspiration of the writing that you talked about it can be directed wide, as in your posts or my posts. So it's general for everyone. But I find that if I'm talking to one person in particular, there's a kind of application of it, which is like a heat-seeking missile that is applicable to their particular stuckness. I know, I don't know what you think about that.
Well, what I think is that you feel a kind of freedom and you want to share it. You want other people to feel that free. I think that's what it's all about.
I do. And I very much know that whether it's received or not has nothing to do with me, or even how well I express it, really. And how well I express it is nothing to do with me either.
I feel the same way. Everything that I say has been said millions of times before. This kind of situation repeats in a way, maybe not with the exact same details, but the same characters filled by different humans for their brief moment on.
And the funny thing, Robert, is I know you've said before, and I totally feel the same, that when this happens, you don't go around thinking about it all the time, because you just live it. The rest of my life, I'm making music and I'm watching a comedy show and I'm just living this life,
Because there are other things. I mean, it's this world of therapy and spirituality is such a tiny slice of the pie. There's so much of great interest just in the world. There's so many different kinds of work. You could study that and look at all these different beautiful rose bushes and their colors, and never think about personality. Yes. So that's kind of where I am at this point. My mind is thoroughly blown. I'm an old man. I have a few years left, probably. And there's so many interesting and joyous things going on. I like being aware of them. And I don't want to talk about spirituality and be a teacher. I want to express myself. And I understand that there are people who read my writing or look at my photographs and have a kind of mind expansion. That's beautiful. I like having that job, but I don't want to do it 4 hours a day. It's more like oh, well, I've said it. I'm rattling on here. Go ahead, you speak. Oh, and who has a hand up? I think I missed that also. No one at the moment. I've got to explain, I'm not usually this discombobulated, but my internet connection is breaking up all the time.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Robert French.
Yes.
You're on the air, Robert.
Finally got it to work. I just wanted to say to you, Robert, and Jez, what I'm hearing is pure gold. It's not really a question, but I just wanted to say that my life has never seemed so full, even though there's all sorts of shit happening in it. And it's just making me feel so alive with the pandemic. I'm going through an energetic awakening that's been going on for the last year. I don't like to use the word kundalini, but that's probably what it is. More, but and there could be a lot of suffering involved with it, but it's just, I seemed a little bit detached from it, and it's making me feel very alive. That's pretty much all I wanted to say.
Okay, no, this is just internet delay. It's getting pretty bad. Well, I heard that, Robert, and you're feeling more energetic. That's good.
It's interesting. I mean, first of all, was it Robert who just spoke?
Robert French.
What can you say? It's all good, isn't it? These things are happening. It's all good.
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up what you said about reading books. It's so funny, you know. I've got a whole library of books that I devoured in years gone by, and well, it doesn't have any relevance anymore. I did read a book about Gurdjieff recently, and there's a kind of there's an interest from a distance that, you know, 100 years ago, people were a small, even in the mind frame of Victorian minds or whatever, earliest 20th century minds, this was, of course, always there. And there was a man who was trying to share this in the same way, and not in the same way, in a certain way, in his way. And the methods he used and the way people were drawn to it, I found that quite interesting to see that this is, of course, it's always been going on, and it's quite beautiful. And in some ways, I think it failed, you know, there, from what I read, in some respects, not in all respects. Yeah, there was a stage in my seeking where, of course, I devoured books from these teachers, and that definitely just goes because, yeah, it's secondhand knowledge.
If you remember back, if you think back into that era of your life, because I had an era like that also. When you look back on it now, what you're saying is, gee, that seems restricted and all this, but at the time you were doing that, the feeling was more, if I could just understand this.
Oh, yes. I'm in no way putting them down, or even saying they were restricted.
Yeah. Sorry for the interruption. As I say, the internet's bad, but I didn't imagine.
Yeah. Like I said, seeking it. No. Like I said, seeking is very much kind of looked down on. And it's like, what are you going to do? You want something, you're going to go after it. You're going to read about it. It's natural. Absolutely. You can say things about this in words, as you do in your posts, and I try to do, that can really, you know, I used to go to a bookshop in Covent Garden in London, which was a kind of Japanesey kind of place. And they had these spiritual books, and I lived just up the road, and I used to wander in there and sit down and pick up a book with Lao Tzu in it, or Buddha, and I could read a quote and it could change my whole day. It would hit me somewhere and open something up, and I didn't know what it meant, but it had that effect on me. So this sort of communication is really important, you know, and your books are obviously having a big effect.
I totally agree with that, and I'm not the one who says seeking is no good or stop seeking. I've never said that. I've never said that. If seeking is what's happening, then that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And who is to judge what purpose or what the meaning of it is? What I say is, if you're not satisfied with this moment, you will seek. You may not be seeking spiritual fulfillment, you may be seeking sexual fulfillment or gustatory fulfillment, or maybe you're looking for a marijuana cigarette or a shot of smack or bourbon.
But the question is, how do you get to that place where you're satisfied with this moment? Isn't that the million-dollar question?
Well, you know what? For me, it's the awareness of impermanence and mortality that brings the real gusto to this moment. I could be dead tomorrow. Truly, I'm at that age anyway. And so this may be the last day of my life. This might be the last 5 minutes of my life. There are brain aneurysms and heart attacks and all the rest of it. I understand that I'm skating on the thinnest ice. And maybe being 75 helps with that, but actually I've felt this way for the last 50 years. I'm just, this is fragile. This is each moment so precious. It's going to eventuate in some way that you probably won't like if you're conscious of it. That's the most common experiences of dying are filled with pain and loss. And if we learn to participate before it gets that dire, perhaps we can participate in it right up to the end. I've heard that could be mind-blowing. So, let's see. That's the real attitude that I bring to this. Truly, it's.
Yeah.
And I think when people hear what I have to say and wake up, so to speak, I think that's real. I think this is what the Buddha said 2,500 years ago. It's old age, illness, and death. That's what we have to look forward to. And my critique of spirituality is that it's sugarcoated. It's just like I won't eat Lucky Charms for breakfast. I want oatmeal. And that's the same thing. I don't want somebody to tell me how happy I will be. I think that gets in the way hearing that. I think it hypnotizes you further and it makes you seek something that's not oatmeal. It's Lucky Charms, fake flavor and a lot of sugar on it. So that's my entire critique. Not that anything is wrong with any of it. I mean, it all has to be here. It's just what you want to eat, what you can eat, what you can stomach. Let's put it that way. It's what you can stomach, and that you really don't know what's going to happen next. Events occur.
Yeah.
In our control. Like I broke my back last year. I ended up in bed for months. There was surgery and couldn't move for a while and all of this. And I was lucky, could have been paralyzed. So 6 months staring at the ceiling when now I can sit here at a computer talking like this and walk around and make my own coffee and all the rest of it. Wow.
Yeah.
Lucky.
Yeah.
And see, I think when we understand that it doesn't have to be this cushion. It doesn't have to be this free. There's all kinds of things that can happen. So what I have to teach is now, while you have this, do it. Don't try to escape from it just because part of it is painful. Find out what isn't painful. Find the beauty. And I don't see that as spiritual teaching, it seems just so ordinary to know that you're going to die. So while you have your youth and vigor or whatever, make use. Love.
I think the certain traditions have encapsulated that message quite well. I think some of the Zen, writings very much, for me, captured this.
I didn't hear that, Jez. Please repeat it.
I think some of the, for me, you know, I'm not a member of anything, but of everything out there, perhaps something that comes the most close as a beautiful, clear, pure expression of this is the Taoist kind of area, and some of the Zen stuff too.
Well,
there are.
Yeah, those are my roots. My first interest was in Taoism. I read Tao
Yeah.
and tried to make sense of it. I kept reading it and tried to make sense of it. And then that led me into the Middle Ages Zen guys, because I realized that Zen Buddhism was a lot like Taoism. And well, those are my teachers. Some of those Middle Age Zen cats, I just understood.
Yeah.
I understood what they were talking about. Like
Yeah.
at the bookstore, you'd read a line or two and that set you up for the day. I had that same experience. Like Foyan would say, it's not the flag that's moving, it's not the wind that's moving, it's your mind that's moving. Well, when I heard that, it just blew my mind. I went around thinking about it for days. Wow.
Yeah.
See, all this is taking place in mind, is what he was saying, and it got through to me. And that's why I now say, years later, having learned from those cats, find your own mind. That's where it's all at.
Yeah.
All of it. It's all taking place in mind. And I don't define that in some mystical way, or, you know, that's not how I mean it, but that's all we know.
I think that's why I relate to those traditions the most, because they don't put that outer coating of mystical stuff and lineages and nirvana and all that shit on top. The basis, the real pure center of those is just, you know, the Basho's pond, you know. That's it. And you don't need all that on top, because that is man created fantasies, you know. For me, that's like intellectualism.
Well, now you've made it a fucking day. All that shit on top. That's right. That's right. That's right. Really, this has been understood for a long time. It's not that.
That's what you can name this. No. And isn't it beautiful to read those old guys from, you know, Lao Tzu was around at the time of Christ, wasn't he? I think, which was quite amazing. And you read something from him and you just, God, this is it. This is the same, you know, some guy back then. And the power of the words is amazing to encapsulate something of this. If you're ready to hear it, only if you're ready to hear it.
Yeah. So
otherwise it can be
there's this subtext in so-called spirituality, which says that we are progressing. And we're the evolving edge of a great revolution in human consciousness, and all of this is a story, and it's going to happen in the next few years. Well, I don't see it that way. When I look back in literature, like Shakespeare, and then before that, the Middle Ages Zen cats, and then all the way back 2,500 years ago to Lao Tzu, it all seems to be the same dance, the same emotions, the same problems of greed and lust and aversion and all of this. It's just maybe played out in different costumes, but I don't see any great progress at all. In fact, some of these people 1,000 years ago were a lot more conscious than most of my friends are. A lot more. I always feel like I'd like to go back in time and hang out with those cats. You were mentioning spiritual and everything. I don't really think I'm doing that. I don't. I think what I'm trying to do is be with people who like to talk this way. You know, it eases my mind, but not that I think I have something to teach them. I think I just like to hang out with people like that. Like my friend Paul Cannell's here. I see him on the screen. Maybe you'll speak. Hi, Paul. Yeah, maybe you'll speak. Paul Cannell, I've never met him in the flesh. He lives in Oz, right? Down there. But I would love to meet this cat. I really would. And see, it's only through writing these books that I got to know Paul. So I think it's about that. It's more about just fellowship and sharing than it is about teaching. Yeah, I'm just saying, for me personally, I don't consider myself that yes, I'm teaching something, but it's philosophy, not spirituality. It's very different. I'm teaching you thinking, critical thinking, but the rest of it, I have nothing to teach. I mean, it is what it is for everybody. You just are where you are.
Yeah.
Nobody knows where you are, how near or how far. Shine on, you crazy diamond. Yes. So that's all it is, man. I'm just on the radical end of it. I couldn't help it. I'm like you. I was a musician. I did all these things, did the drugs and all this, just like we all have. And this is the result. Oh boy. My mom would love this.
Special age now, and
yeah,
we're in a special age now, and this is the group ego, the group personality trying to feel special. Oh, we're really getting somewhere. On the evidence of the world, no, we're not. They're not really getting somewhere. We might be going backwards.
Jazz, this is a downright pleasure. You're really inspiring. Hearing you just so right on. It's just as you say. I think you really got a handle on that, and I find it quite enlightening. In the sense of lightning. It's very lightning to hear you speak.
Me too with you. How about Paul? I'd like to hear from Paul.
Hello.
Is Paul
Can
there?
you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hello, Jess. Good to meet you.
Hello. Are you Paul?
Hello. I am Paul.
Hi.
Pleased to meet you. And hi, Robert. And it's actually funny. I was thinking about, I wrote something recently about all these people that are hoping for a great awakening. And I think you guys just talked about it then. To me, it's like they're hoping for a utopia to come about, but I don't see it that way. I see it more like when these so-called arrived prophets preach about there being an ultimate arrival or a great awakening. To me, that if you were to buy into that, you would be going into the great sleepening. It's more of a sleepening, not an awakening. So when I wrote that, I wrote it recently on a little page I got, but I find that when I'm writing, I'm not being malicious or anything like that. I'm just expressing how I see it. And I'm also blowing away my own cobwebs as well. There's so much bullshit out there. So it's my way of addressing any bullshit in myself and also resisting, well, not resisting, but not allowing people to get into my own mind with their their dreams of an ultimate state or anything like that. So, and I've, when you are that honest with yourself, you can lose a lot of things, a lot of material things. You don't know what's going to happen next. You can lose, but I am okay with that. And with this pandemic and everything that's happening at the moment, there will be another pandemic, but right now we don't need people talking about a great awakening to avoid what is actually happening. And so they talk about people, there are lucky people in the world that will have self-isolation and time to do their art and their writing and all sorts of things. But I'm a contrarian in that I see the opposite side of that, where there are people that are living behind closed doors in horrible situations that when they do self-isolate, they really are going to be stuck with certain situations which would be unnameable, but that in those situations people would have carte blanche with each other. And so I think of that as as opposite side of the coin of not buying into a utopia, and rather just seeing the reality of what is actually happening. And it makes me sad, because when I think of that, there's not much you can do. You can't stand outside the universe and wrap your arms around it and pull strings or anything like that. You only have your own subjective viewpoint from inside out. You can't stand outside the actual moment and do anything. You can't even get behind the happening of each moment. So all you have comes for Choiceless Awareness. For me, when I first read Krishnamurti and ideas and questions which I'd read from him sat in my mind lightly for years, and they still do, and then they flower and they drop. For me, yes, Choiceless Awareness is just noticing what is actually happening, and everything's permitted. Fear, horror, terror, pain, joy, sadness. It's ever changing, but it's all permitted. And I don't see a great awakening happening, and I think that's misleading, and it's a denial, and it's a cruel thing to drag people into. I can understand people need the comforts of that, but for me personally, as I express myself, I see great danger in that, because it's a cruel kind of schadenfreude where you're denying or avoiding the reality of a situation, which is changing all the time. But it's fear of the unknown about what could happen. I think Robert has said once, the next minute could be far, far worse, or could be far, far better. You don't know. And so for me, one of the things that I've somehow open to is to walk along the razor's edge. Nihilism on one side, as Robert said, nihilism on one side, eternalism on the other, comforts and all that stuff. But when you're just walking one foot in front of the other, moment by moment, as Robert says, bite by bite, each moment, you just chew it up. And at some point, the space may open up, but you're not hoping for it to open up. You're not trying to make it open up. It's gonna be what it's going to be. And this is a hard thing to hear for a lot of people. And I don't know what that thing is, but it's here. And in walk and that open the space, as you walk one foot in front of the other, you don't have to be or do anything. And as you guys say, there's no self-improvement needed, any of that. One thing that I've found interesting about this that is happening at the moment is the dropping away of some images. So before, people may have cared about how they looked and how they appeared to people, their dress sense, their hair. I think it does have some things to offer, but not in a. It'll offer what it has to offer a person, but to offer the hoax of a great awakening, to me, is just it's so subtle, but it's sometimes the most subtle thing hides such violence, and it creates even more danger because it takes you away from the immediacy of the situation. So that's sort of my outlook on that. I mean, I've spent a few years, sort of last 10 years, being very quiet and by myself, and I used to beat myself up a lot about that. But then I just go with what is and do my writing and walk one foot in front of the other, and yeah, whatever happens will happen, and I don't know, no one knows, but I guess it's just being with it. It is exactly what it is. It's unknown. You may have fears, but they will come and go. You don't know what the next feeling is, but it's there is a noticing. And I think the other thing that Robert said was that myself is not the author of thoughts, feelings, and emotions. I think it's the noticer of them. But to try and put a label on that, what that is to create a splitting again. So anyway, yeah, I hope I get to see you one day, Robert. That would be quite nice. Anyway, so I have my little rant. So yeah, nice to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks for checking in, Paul. It's great to see you. Great to hear you. So Jez earlier had listed 4 qualities he considered part of awakening. I'll have to get him to review those. So this is another quality. I don't know if that was in his list or not. It's what I call radical self-acceptance. And I think when we see things as they are, we totally accept ourselves. It's not that someone is doing acceptance. It's just you have no choice. I mean, things are as they are, including oneself. And I think that's what I heard in what you're saying, that yourself is going to flower as it does, and it doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't need.
Imagine an animal like, a leopard sort of thinking, oh, I'm a bad leopard, I made a bad kill. I missed that mongoose or whatever it is. I'm such a bad hunter. I've got to be better. It's like, it's just in a way, there's no part of you that can say, well, as you say, acceptance is just part of it, because I didn't make the way I am. I'm just what I am. The idea of standing outside, I know that's what happens in personality. Judging oneself. So I could have done that better. I should have done that. And it's not that you couldn't have done it better, but you do what you do at the time. And there's no heavy thing put on you because that's what happened. And that's how life expressed it in that moment. So there's a taken away of a kind of judge. There's not a taken away of judgment at all, because judgment is absolutely there. But it doesn't come from personality. It's just simply the ability to discern and weigh up things. But that self-critical thing is a different thing, and it just doesn't arise. That to me is a big example of the kind of thing that arises in personality that goes. And it's a terrible thing. The idea of going through your life and thinking you're a bad person, it's insane. It's like, that's like a civil war, it's like within one's own being, there's a fight with oneself. There's no winner in that. It's just endless wastage of energy. Now, I know that's easy to say, and I know it happens, and I have compassion for that. But I'm pointing out, like you're pointing out, that that's the sort of thing that doesn't exist in this.
Well, some of that is imposed culturally.
Well,
I know this because when Chogyam Trungpa first came to the States, he confessed to being amazed that such a thing as lack of self-esteem was a thing, was an issue at all. Culturally, in that part of the world, most people do esteem themselves. Learned that growing up, just as people in the Western world learned that you have to prove yourself somehow, and before you can really accept yourself, and it's not okay to just be the way you are right now. So, but I think this is connected to what Paul was very closely connected to it, because what I see in Paul is a radical self-acceptance. And with that comes this kind of peace that he was discussing. It's all of it. It comes together. when you don't have to strive, but can just be with the way you are, well, then you are at peace. And then you're not afraid of what might happen next. You realize when that happens, you'll be doing that one.
Well, I'll jump in there, Robert. I remember you were saying what I think there was a subtle change when you said something like it's not. I think we were discussing on a post with a lady, and she was talking. You basically you said it's not therapy I'm after now. And I've had my time with some psychotherapists, and they were very helpful, for sanity. And who knows, it may happen again. But there's a time for ruthless self-discovery, and that really shows me that the top dog versus underdog solidifies the I, keeps you fixed. You're at war with yourself. You feel you're worthless because you've been told that you need to be worthy. Both sides of the same coin. Pride and shame getting flipped around, same coin. How can anyone flow when you're being, dogged by and so it really comes back to, for me, which I've been doing for a while and will still continue to, not I doing it, but I'm aware that it's the natural noticing of things as they arise in each moment. And I think you said it was Camus that said likes and dislikes have nothing to do with it. Is that Cat's Cradle or is that Vonnegut?
It's Vonnegut. That's Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut.
Thanks very much. I don't want to take up any more of your time there, but yeah, nice to talk to you, Jez, and nice to talk to you, Robert.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, it's good hearing from you, Paul. Really great.
To say that I think what Paul described there is a lot of the facets of personality and how they can fall away and lessen because they don't control the life anymore. And acceptance, as you've said, is one part of something that blossoms out of that.
Yeah, so some of the issues,
and
some of the issues you mentioned are things that I dealt with as a psychotherapist, the low self-esteem and all these other manifestations. And that does need to be treated when it arises. It's not that, and one of my points is that spirituality is not a good treatment for that. It might seem that way at first, but then what you get are people who remain wounded and they become addicted to this spirituality as the anti-anxiety pill or whatever. And that's a hypnotic. So if somebody is really hurting, I will talk to that person on this psychotherapeutic level. What's going on with you now? How are you feeling? Take a deep breath. I don't consider that spirituality. Spirituality, what I call spirituality, is this attempt to define the limits of the universe and where humans fit into all of this. And to me, that trying to put a rope on that is just insanity. Nobody knows anything about that stuff. Nothing. Zero. And that's the funny thing, because there's all this palaver about it. Books, stone tablets, and all the rest of it. And there's no knowledge in it. It's all belief. It's 100% belief, no knowledge. Amazing. And people are hypnotized by this. And then they, instead of dealing with fears, which you do in psychotherapy, instead they just use this stone tablet, if you're a Jew, cross, if you're a Christian, whatever it is, it's like a magic totem, it's an object. And that's like taking an anti-anxiety, like a Xanax. You're on Xanax, except it's a cross. And you don't really live life. So what we try to do in therapy is to get people to recognize their personality, to see it and make friends with it. And then later, if there's some disappearance of the personality, that's great. But I think the intervention that I'm interested in comes earlier. And when I tried spiritual teaching, this is what you were asking me about before, or we were talking about before. When I tried that, I found I had to retreat into what I'm doing now, which is just confession. This is like stand-up to me or something, stand-up comedy. I mean, it's all hanging out there. There's no teaching involved because there's no intent. When I was a psychotherapist, I wasn't managing those cases. I'd learned how you're supposed to manage them, but I was just being honest without manipulating.
Well, I think one thing we...
Go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, one thing for sure, that this is about taking away beliefs.
Yes, I think the thing that you and I, where we really coincide strongly, having had this experience where you find yourself free. That's what happens. You say, "My God, I'm free," right? You just say, "My God, I'm free. This happened. This is amazing," because you've heard this happens to some people, as you pointed out in your book, in your second book. They're not these exalted people. This is the shit that happens to people. I mean, it's a human event.
Yeah.
See through to an extent.
It's ordinary, but
it's ordinary.
But there are characteristics of what this is, and that's what we're kind of talking about and describing as a way to share what this is with people who are ready to hear it. And one of those things is the losing of those soothing beliefs. That's one of the biggest things, I would say. And Paul mentioned aloneness, and I thought that was very interesting, because there's one thing for sure, that this is about a confrontation with aloneness. And I guess it goes hand in hand with losing those beliefs of a comfort. You know, those beliefs actually stop you confronting life head on. And the aloneness is something that has to be confronted. There's no two ways about that. When I had the breakdown, the main thing I felt was an aloneness more than I'd ever felt before. I felt like I was kind of on the far side of the moon, and the whole of everyone else was on the earth, and I was the far side of the moon. And then somehow I managed to, I came back from it, but I couldn't describe what it was like. And my experience was so different and was so scary to everyone that I couldn't, they actually were like, yeah, okay, you've been mentally ill. I don't want to know about it. It's too scary. But that aloneness is, you know, we come alone when if you look at a young baby, it's in aloneness, and it's fed by life, and it's beautiful. It's loneliness is a kind of personality trait, but aloneness is a natural state. It's how we come, and it's what we return to in this. And, you know, I'm so blessed to have a beautiful, loving wife. And one thing's for sure, that whatever I have to face in my life and she has to face, whatever our relationship is, it can't take that away. It's because we face that aloneness that the relationship is what it is. And the love that's there is more special because it comes from that grounding that first is aloneness and then there is relationship. I think a lot of people use relationship as a running away from the aloneness.
Well, that's for sure.
Yeah. And once the aloneness is faced, the love, when you then experience connection, my God, it's even more wonderful and, you know, beautiful. Because Robert was saying, Jez mentioned there were some attributes he put to it, and I'll just run over them. So those attributes that I've found are joy, full feeling engagement with life. So this is what I mean, that beliefs actually can stop that. Choiceless awareness. And yeah, the other one skips my mind right now. But
stillness.
Stillness, yeah. And if you look at a newborn baby, and I often use this because it's a way, it's not just, this is not just a theory, you can see it, and if you sit with a newborn baby, okay, babies can cry, babies can have this upset or that upset, but in general, early on in a baby's life, in many babies, it's possible to sit and see choiceless awareness happening. Whatever comes into their field of vision and their experience is what they experience. And there's absolutely there's no ability to reject anything yet. And to see, and not just see, but feel that stillness that they emanate. And also there is the joy, you can put the finger and they grab the finger and they connect with the human being and the parent and whoever it is. And you can see that joy rising in them. And so for me, this is a way of expressing and conveying something that is, we all began with. That's my contention. We all began with this, and it is our natural state. And in the awakening, this is what is returned to.
I am back. I heard everything you said.
Hey, Robert.
Hi. I had to pee.
Yeah.
This has been such a great meeting. There's so much good that was said, and I'm really going to regret when I see how bad the recording is. It's so sad. But I'm still going to try to piece a lot of it together because I love so many of the things that you said, Jess, particularly in reply to questions. I thought that was really beautiful. And this also really clarified something for me, this conversation, because there was nothing you said that I had to take exception to. I could think more about myself, how I fit into what you were saying. And I see that what somebody might think of as teaching, for me, is just personal confession. I don't really have a game plan here, and I don't really have any answers. So I can just talk about myself and how I see things or how I experience them. And Paul's here. I think Paul's made use of that. I know he has. So that's cool. And maybe if Paul had come to me just person to person and said, I have these questions, I could reply to them in a way that would help him. So I agree with you there, Des. I don't think it may mean that there's a space there. I guess there really isn't. It's more vocabulary. I'm just calling it confession, but it's more like if someone asks me a question, I'll just answer it.
Say a bit more. I didn't quite get it.
Yeah, I think I made a muddle of it.
Are you saying that like I've got a kind of system?
No,
and you don't? Is that
no. I'm not. What I'm saying is I don't really think there is a distinction. I think you're talking about a kind of teaching that can take place when you don't have a system, where you're taking away this, you're breaking the person out of whatever system they were in. Let's put it that way. You're showing them whatever system is it's like a pair of tight shoes. You can't really walk in them. You have to take that off.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm there too.
So when I've read a bit about Gurdjieff, I've realized that that's what he was doing. He was breaking down those personalities, that he was kind of offending them and tripping them up, and he seemed to have a very yang and dynamic energy that, I would never be like that myself because I wouldn't be that proactive. But I think if somebody comes to me and asks for help in seeing their personality, that happens. Would you not agree that having seen your own, it's very easy to see it in others?
Yeah,
the bullshit, the beliefs.
Yeah, of course. I totally agree with everything you've said. I agree with your outlook. I guess I just don't like to call that spiritual teaching. It has too many negative associations. Seeing too many people hypnotized by spirituality. This is just my outlook.
Yeah.
So, I don't want that designation. I don't want to be stuck. I don't want anybody to call me a spiritual teacher. I don't want, that would be uncomfortable.
No. Yeah.
Someone else might not. I see your hand, John. I'll give it to you in a minute. I think somebody might. I've lost that thread. John, try, please speak up.
Something I've noticed about the so-called spiritual paradigm is that there is all these models behave around it, and those models of behavior start to exclude some kinds of behavior and praise other kinds of behavior, and you get into this saint stuff, and it can be crippling, not freeing. The whole, to me, spiritual doesn't mean anything, except maybe the ideas about behavior and how you would define it. Well, a spiritual person is joyful or peaceful or this or that and the other. And then folks start trying to behave that way, and it's crippling in a way, in that it robs them just being themselves, just as they are, in that what Robert calls radical self-acceptance. So all of these models of behavior around spirituality and spiritual people, I don't think is helpful at all. I don't think there's a way to define it, to say this person is, all the peace of this person is overwhelming and he transmits that peace to me and all this stuff. I think that's more learned ignorance and crippling, in that you be something other than how the universe is blooming you. And it's not a radical acceptance. So that's it. That's what I want to say. Were you able to hear me?
Yeah, I heard you well, John. I think that what Jez and I are talking about is remarkably the same thing. This is kind of interesting because when we chatted the first time, we seemed to agree, and yet I was left with a certain question, but that's totally resolved now. I think we're just using different vocabulary for the same thing, which is that, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jez, that we both feel a sense of freedom, and somehow that happened. No one's sure how exactly. In both cases, it involved some kind of cataclysm. Mine was long illness. I didn't think I would survive. When I was done with that, I was really cooked. The awakening thing had happened before the illness, but it never really resolved. It was like a thorn in my side. And then eventually with that illness, when it came out the other side of it, I was cooked in that sense. And so you have this freedom, and then you just want to share that with people because it feels good. And not even because, you just want to share it with people. The desire is there at all times.
Yeah.
And so we agree on that. And names for that really don't define anything. And I think that's what John was saying.
Yeah.
That, it's not about how good your manners are or whatever. That's not the point. The point is to find your own mind. Your own mind, not what somebody told you to find. Or some famous Ramana, whatever, said he found. So what? That was his life. Whatever he found, I hope he made his peace with it. But to take someone to this is what John was getting at, to glorify someone as a saint is to destroy your own mind. all it is.
Yeah, it comes back to belief, doesn't it? It comes back to belief and a projection of an ideal. And I mean, I'm certainly not talking about that, but I am describing something that is real in my experience. And I'm not looking away from that in case somebody idolizes it, because the way I talk about it, I try to leach out all that kind of projection that goes on. I'm actually trying to demystify it. I guess I could say that because it isn't all those things that they put on it. So interestingly, I totally understand what you said, Robert, about not wanting to be called a spiritual teacher because of what that word has become. It's the same way that we talked about the word seeking has become a negative kind of solid word, and enlightenment has become. I found the definition of spiritual meaning outside of personality. So for me, when I use it in that sense, it's a positive thing. But I understand the connotations that you're talking about totally, and why you wouldn't want to have that put on you, and I wouldn't want that to be put on me. But in that definition of spiritual, if we take, this is why words are so important, isn't it? That's a use of it that is quite different. Yeah. And that's a use, I used it in that way in the book. I looked it up, I thought, well, what do people actually mean by spiritual? You know, how are we going to use it in my book? How am I going to use it? What do I mean by it? And I took that definition, I thought that actually works for me. The real spiritual, capital S, is beyond personality. And that which is beyond personality is beyond those beliefs and those emotions and those projections and all of the stuff where the mystery begins.
Well, there's this other point that you raised, kind of between the lines, which is what you were saying is, I can't quote you, but I'll be damned if I let the fear of being idealized or idolized stop me, because this has to come out. I think that's what I understood. Is that what you were saying?
Not really. What I mean is that you could not talk about this because you could say it's impossible. As soon as you do, spiritual people are going to put their crap on you and reinterpret what you say. And I suppose the only thing I've found is that my job is to kick that off constantly and to preserve what is true in this, and that there is something that can be pointed to, let's say, and in some ways you could say taught. It's not that, but only taught in the sense that someone is ready and you can just, this is what you're doing. Like it or not, that is what you're doing. That's what I'm doing too.
Yeah.
And so one sense it's a kind of teaching. You could interpret it as that. But once again, we're in that area that it's so dirtied, that word.
Well, but I have a personal problem with it. It's just part of the way I don't want to use the word personality because you and I don't use it in the same way.
Yeah.
But now I understand what you meant by it. I totally agree.
Your character.
Well, I can't really split this into character and personality so easily. I think they blend over, and the personality never goes away. It can modify by being seen, but you see, I have this quirk, whether it's character, personality, or something else, where being idealized is very tiresome to me.
Oh, I totally agree.
And it makes me sad also. And so I rebel against it. And in order to carry on as the speaker in the chair, who's everybody wants to hear what this cat's saying. I get that. I would have wanted to hear what I'm saying. Then, when I was young, hear someone like who's speaking the way I am now, I would have considered this a gift, of course. I get that. But then when somebody thinks, well, Robert Saltzman, he's just the coolest thing, that's not good. It takes away from
But see, Robert, that's why you're, I would say that's the difference. That's why you're awake and you're not a spiritual personality. That's a defining thing, because most of the spiritual personalities out there in teaching are hooked into that approbation, that, hey, the great master, and that's, you can tell if someone knows this or not. There's a difference. And that's one of the ways, there's a famous, let's not go into that. There are signs that show people are into just what you've said are not into. Did you see what I mean?
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Well, so let me ask you a question, since you were in that Rajneesh thing in the 80s. And I noticed it was a very big deal on the planet. So
it was.
Okay, so here's Rajneesh. And I actually read a couple of his books early on, before he was a big name. They'd been printing in India on that cheap paper, the books I mean. And I thought, this guy's really brilliant. I thought, I really like hearing this. It's cool what this cat's saying. And then a couple of years later, he's at the center of a cult. So since you were there what do you make of this? What is that? In other words, if Rajneesh really understood these things, how could he really tolerate having these celebrations going on around him all the time, where he was like a god and had all these Rolls Royces and all the rest of it? What is that? I'm asking you your opinion. What is that?
It's, I can only say from the vantage point of this, you speak from the vantage point of what has happened in you, and I can speak from this vantage point. And a lot of sannyasins are going to absolutely hate this, but all I can say is what I've just said just now, really, which is that kind of bullshit doesn't happen after leaving all the personality behind.
That's what I think too. That's exactly what I think. I think that for someone in this condition, it's not possible to have that form around.
It's not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. You're going to be insulting people who talk to you that way. You're not going to be, cozying up to them. You're going to be saying, get the fuck out of here and come back when you're,
because you're prolonging their suffering. If you're not pointing out that bullshit, you're prolonging, you're not helping them, you're doing the opposite. You're entrapping them. And I tell you, Robert, the thing that got me into the first place to read the books, and there was a real theme of organizations, religions. You got to drop it all, you got to leave it all behind. It's all bullshit. You got to drop all that to be free. And what happens a few years down the line? He's doing that. He's creating that. And he's created a lot of people who are entranced in that, hypnotically entranced in that. And this is absolute blasphemy. And I know if there's any sannyasins watching, they're going to hate me for this. But this is my observation. So take it or leave it, But that seems to be what happened. Did it create people who found this? Maybe a few, I don't know. But yeah, it was a very strange story, because he was so brilliant, he was a brilliant man.
Seeing it.
I can't square for me.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Internet connection is so strange. I can't really time it. What I saw there, I think that he was very brilliant and probably really psychopathic. And I think he used hedonism as a sales tool.
I think how we got into this is a really interesting point, which is you explained an aversion you have to anyone projecting their spiritual stuff on you. And that's what, when that goes wrong, then you get cults. And, you know, there's someone out there now who's, can you imagine, Robert, somebody coming to you and wanting to kiss your feet?
No.
Can you imagine? What does that take
I can't
to allow that to happen?
I cannot imagine being motherfucking Muji. No, I can't. But here's the question. Can somebody serve as the screen for these projections? And that would be a form of spiritual teaching. That's what the Hindus all think. You know, you adore the master and you kiss his feet and all that because the master stands for Brahma. And that's what Muji,
yeah.
That's Muji's deal.
Yeah.
Is there any sanity in that at all? Or is that?
I don't think so, because for me, this is going, like I started out saying, to bring it full circle. And the personality's escape routes and its beliefs, and anything that sends you to sleep is not helping you get free of what I would call the personality. So I don't think any of that helps you. I think there's no problem with a devotional path that in as much as the heart is a big involvement in this and love is a big part of this. But I don't see how you can have that without this cutting that is necessary to see through the dream of personality or the hypnosis, as you called it. I don't see how, to me, this is the practicalities of how it happened, how it happens.
Yeah, the sword of Manjushri is a very important implement in this work, for sure. And that's Manjushri is a god in Buddhism, and he's got a sword in his hand, and then he has a symbol of compassion. It might be a lotus, I don't remember. Or, no, it's a book in his hand. So it's enlightened wisdom cutting through the crowd. So, which is whenever anyone makes a claim, I always feel first, yes, and you know that how. And whenever I apply that to the claims of these various traditions, they fall short. And yet, when I discuss this with other people, they will say, well, as you said, I'm not saying you say this, but they will talk about bhakti, and they'll say, see, these people, when I kiss Muji's feet, I'm showing my devotion to. So I just wonder what you make of that. It's bizarre to me, but I can't see it.
Well, you're in a state of devotion, and perhaps that puts you in some ways, you can imagine that releasing endorphins. You know, you've seen the movies of them queuing up to be near him. And for me, it's like deja vu. I mean, he is the Rajneesh of our times, and he even starts to look like him with the beard and the hats and the way people are around him. I saw a video recently of Rajneesh. Haven't seen it for a while, and this memory flooded back of the way people were around him and the absolute devotion. So, and you know, it's all about getting out of your head and being in a devotional state. And it's a lovely drug, I think. You know, it can be a very nice place to go to. And you've got a daddy figure who you project all your stuff on, and he's God to you, and you don't have to take, and in a way, there's no responsibility anymore. It's like, oh, he's done it, so I don't have to do it. I don't have to wake up because he's done it.
That is the exact point. we get a stand-in, and we say, this cat figured it out, and he laid out the path, and all I have to do is, you know, climb the ladder, and I'll get there too. And it doesn't work that way. It really doesn't. I know.
No, you have.
I know so many people who, they're nice people, they're gentle, and they call themselves spiritual, and they got their horoscopes and their prayers and all that. And to me, they're just so deluded. It's just bizarre. And yet, when I say that to certain people I respect, they'll tell me, look, Robert, that's a path also, and you know, that's bhakti, and you're not that way. But so can you take me anywhere with that, Jez?
Yeah, the bottom line there is like, okay, does it work? Are these people finding this, or are they getting stuck in devotion? Are they finding, if they find it, they'll get the hell out of there, surely. You don't worship someone if you if you found what you think they've got yourself. So the bottom line is, does it work? Does it really work? And if it works, you're not going to hang around. Okay, maybe there would be a gratitude and a wanting to thank, but I can't see how you would want to be. If you find something, you don't continually look up to the person who helped you get it. You live that thing yourself and become your own light to it. I tried it for a while. I mean, I never really had that devotional thing with him, but I guess he represented something to me. And he obviously, like I said, I don't think I've ever heard a greater speaker than him. I mean, I'm talking about earlier days now, later days, something else. You know, incredible orator. And so I had great respect for him in that way, but I didn't really have the devotional thing. So I guess I didn't really fit in with that sannyas ethos. So it didn't take me long to get out of it, but I got out of it as soon as I knew it was actually part of it was a kind of escape. So when it had turned to me from being, here's the guy who's talking about getting out of these systems and these beliefs, when it started taking on the taste of those things that he was talking about getting free of, I thought, well, I'm out. It served my purpose for me. I'm moving on. I do have great respect for what he did, but I don't look away from like I always say, like, you have to see life as it is. And I see the brilliance of that man. And I also see the crap that went on around him. And that doesn't square with the awakened man. You know, you can't say, I didn't know what was going on, why somebody was poisoned, why someone was killed. There's nothing to do with me. You can't have it both ways, you know.
Okay, so we really agree on this. That's great. Glad to hear that, because
yeah,
everything else, which is really a pleasure.
What I love what you said is, you know, there's picking up of somebody starting to put that on you. And the aversion to that in you is the most beautiful thing I've heard all night. You know, that is what this is about. To me, that shows where you're coming from. And that shows where a lot of people are not coming from. I feel exactly the same. It's like a sort of, oh no, don't do that. And you have to actually work to stop it happen sometimes, you know.
Yeah, well,
you have to insert things.
I like that about you too. I mean, you did well writing your books and being a children's author, and now you can you don't need to have a hustle with spiritual teaching or anything. And yet, if you wanted to, you have all the right stuff, just like Rajneesh. I mean, he got it, obviously got it at some point, but he lost it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what can happen. I see it happening actually around me in spiritual teachers. Some of them start off really good and very few of them maintain it for long. It's like being a rock star or something. Pretty soon you're in the back room getting a blowjob and the drugs and everything, and then the music comes second.
It's an interesting question, that, isn't it? It's like, how is it possible to lose this? I mean, you know, I've written a bit about this because for me, the way I say it is there's a difference between having an awakening and what I call the shift. And that's a delineation. I think we discussed it a little bit at one point, maybe, because I do feel there's a point of no return. And that point is a point where what you've described just now, the antithesis, the aversion to that shit being put on you, is a quality of what I would call the shift. I don't think there's any going back from that. That's my experience. I don't know. I know people can say, how do you know? And maybe in the future you will lose this. I can't really say anything about that. What I've observed is people have massive experiences, and they're very big, and they're very true and important for them. And that's all good. But it's what, if the personality comes back in, is what it does with it. So if there's any need for any applause and being looked up to, or manipulation of people, those tendencies in the personality have the perfect setting in which to play out. I mean, the point of this is that those desires to be special, that is the thing that drops away. That's my take on this. So if you're using this to make yourself feel special, you ain't got this. That's not what this is. That's something else. And you might have very good insights, and you might have a great knowledge of Vedantic history or whatever, but that's not what I'm talking about. Or it's a different thing. Yeah. So I don't have any motivation in this other than, like, you know, I have no idea where this is going for me. I don't know what, it's not like a career or anything. Like you, I'm simply sharing. And the energetic source of it, the reason I'm doing it is simply because it wants to be shared, and it's joyful to share it, most of the time anyway. And that's all it is. There's nothing else put on it. Nothing. I don't need the money. So it's the actual emptiness of it, emptiness of what's the word? Of any needs put on it that characterize what this is.
Yeah. Some of your voice dropped out entirely after "I don't need the money" to almost the last thing you said, unfortunately, because I could see your mouth moving, but I couldn't hear anything.
I think I said I don't need the attention or the applause, but then somebody might say, well, why are you doing it? And I'm doing it because this is the way I've been made. I do have a facility with writing, and I seem to have a facility for expressing certain things. And life is doing that through me. So that gives me a fulfillment and a joy. And it's nothing more than that. Just as when I wrote books and illustrated books, I had a facility with drawing, and I love to do it.
Yeah. So I think there's a theory in psychology by a cat named Heinz Kohut, who was a post-Freudian. I wrote about him in my PhD dissertation. He believed that what you would call character in each of us has an innate program that it wants to run, and it tries to run that. And a success is when the innate program is realized. You feel a sense of relief and release because this, what he called tension arc, has gone out of it. This program has been carried out. And I think someone like you or like me, that program involves what we're talking about here, which is freeing oneself or becoming free and sharing that. It's almost like you were born to do this.
Yeah, it's like a painter wants to paint and a singer wants to sing, and we do what we're programmed to do, how we're made. There's nothing more to it than that, and that gives a fulfillment. Fulfillment is a good word. It's a fulfillment of whatever talents were put in me and whatever talents were put in you. And personally, I find when I see people fulfilling their talent, I have a great joy in that, in whatever field it's in. You know, I love certain comedy programs. If somebody's a brilliant comic, I love it. I love seeing people who are fulfilling their talent, because that for me is the beauty, part of the beauty of life, you know.
Totally agree. I totally agree with that. Look, I'm getting tired, so I'd like to end.
Yeah, me too.
Otherwise, it could go on. It's been great speaking with you. I wish I had a better recording of it, because there's been some brilliant moments. I want to thank the people who were here. There's still 11 of us. And just thank you all for your presence. Amy, you never spoke. I see you though. I saw you there the whole time. Hi there, Amy. So Tim, I've seen you here, but you didn't say anything either. Okay, that's beautiful. And Susie, you don't have a picture, but I see you're here. So with that, I'm going to say sayonara. I love you all. Be happy.